Daniel from the lion's den with no struggle and no strife. And he gave him victory over wicked men who had sought to take his life. In the same wonderful way, in the same wonderful way, God can still answer prayer and show his mighty power. In the same wonderful
It brings back a lot of memories.
Oh, yeah, that brings back some memories, oh, for sure.
As far as I'm concerned, Faith Church started because God wanted it to do. And the Faith Quartet, I believe with all my heart that God wanted that to start too.
When we've had our first choir rehearsal, I heard this voice in the tenor section, and it was Harvey Anker, I found out afterwards. And I says, boy, that man has got a voice. And I said, we could build a quartet around him. So after the practice, I talked to Harvey and I said, would you like to sing in a quartet? He says, oh yeah. I says, I sang in a quartet at my former church. In fact, my brother-in-law did too. I says, well, gee whiz, there's three guys right there. Now all we need is a bass, you know. And we got a bass, and that started the Faith Quartet.
The reason God put me in that situation is to keep the rest of them humble. Because, my ribs are still a little tender because when I did sing a wrong note, he would jab me, and I got calluses here to prove.
Oh, sure, yeah. We had just moved to South Allen as a family, and my wife and I were talking about where we were going to go to church. And she said, well, I heard that there's a new church starting. It's a Faith Reformed Church, and it's going to be at the McKinley Gym. I said, well, let's go. And we did. We really enjoyed the service. We enjoyed the preaching. The people were very friendly.
I think Faith Church at that point in time was like it is now. It was a very welcoming and warm church.
It was different. It wasn't your typical Dutch church. You could tell there was more focus on outreach.
Faith Church was always mission-minded. We reached out to the community and the world.
Music was a very important part of the worship. There was a choir, there was a quartet. They would have special evening worship services that were virtually all music. And so it was an inviting place for people to be. And we saw the church grow slowly, but obviously it was nothing like what we have seen in the latter years in South Holland or in the years since we have moved here to Dyer.
I think the plan always was to build and have a site, have a place. McKinley had its limitations, and for instance, you were in a school building that you couldn't use during the week.
We had to raise a lot of money. And it was a situation where, to God be the glory, because I personally had my doubts whether or not we could swing it. Everybody had their qualms about, hey, I hope this works. We called ourselves Faith Church, but at that point, maybe we didn't have enough faith. But it worked. We had some good givers, and we raised the money that we had to get started.
Mm-hmm. It was a gorgeous building.
Yeah.
Really, it really was a gorgeous building.
I would just, sometimes when I had free time, I would come down and watch the building and so forth, When it was all finished, before the dedication, I went up in the balcony and just sat down and just looked at all that, had been done. And actually, I shed tears at that point, just to see how God had led us thus far. here was a church that started from scratch, from nothing. And here we are, our own building. I just was emotionally overtaken at that point.
And then the great ministry of reconciliation. If we were the only Christians left in the world, it'd be our duty to get the gospel out to the whole world. It would not be our privilege to go to the Lord and make excuses about our lack of numbers, our lack of means. It's our obligation, individually, do you hear me? Individually, whoever you are, I don't care how old you are, we're duty-bound to get the gospel out to the whole world, knowing the will of God. Let's walk unto all pleasing, and let's be fruitful in every good work.
Pastor Rosenberg, he was, I would say, one who was a soul winner from, that was his sole purpose in life, to see people come to Christ.
And he was a fired up guy. He was another guy that put his heart and soul into things, and he had a great zeal to reach out to unchurched people. So he didn't say he was reaching the disconnected, but that was his heart. I always liked to be, I wanted to be, I dreamed of being a part of church that would see people come in and where the church would make a big difference in their lives and where we'd see life change. And occasionally it happened, but it didn't happen on a regular basis.
We grew quite a bit when Dr. DeYoung was here as a result of his very strong preaching gift. And when he moved on, we kind of plateaued and started going the opposite direction. That's why the decision was made to bring on another pastor to really focus on that call.
You know, I hear Bill Bauer's got a kid, and Bob's dad, Bill. I hear Bill Bauer's got a kid in New Jersey that's doing a good job.
Yeah, I knew Bob and Lori from Northwestern College. We were both students at the same time there. So it was kind of neat to hear that's who they were interviewing. It was like, oh, I know Bob and Lori. And he was always full of energy, kind of the life of the party on campus. Not that we partied on campus.
Bob and I met one of the first days that we were at college. I noticed this guy in his white tennis shorts and his pink Izod. We kind of struck it off and started talking and hanging out, and the rest is history.
So that was just kind of a cool connect, because after college, I didn't stay connected with them. So then when they visited for like interviews or the search team, I remember hanging out with them at a picnic and just thinking, how cool would it be to serve in the same church with them?
So I was willing to take a chance on him. He was a young guy, but I heard nothing but good things about him and what he was doing where he was.
Well, in 1987, when Courtney was a year old, Bob and I and Courtney ventured to New Jersey, where Bob started a year-long internship at the First Reformed Church of the Palisades in Fort Lee, New Jersey.
And I took an internship there. Wanted to experience the city, and it was raw city. And I liked the church, they liked me, and they said, don't go back to seminary, finish here. And I became a pastor, I was ordained there, and I was a youth pastor, student pastor there, and preached just a little bit.
Over the next 2 years, Bob learned a lot about evangelism and just had a heart for lost people that was developing and God was instilling in him. And then around 2 years into that, Faith Church sent an invitation for Bob to consider becoming an associate pastor.
Faith called. They said, we're looking for an associate pastor. And I said, you guys sound great, but no, I want to preach more and I want to lead a little bit. And I let that go. And then 6 months later, Don Pierceman called me, an elder at Faith Reformed Church, and said, you didn't really say no. You said no to a position as associate pastor. Would you prayerfully consider it if it was a co-pastorate until the current pastor would resign and retire? And quite honestly, that changed things, and I liked the story of who they were. Strong believer in the Bible. They had a heart from the beginning of evangelism, and they also loved being the Reformed theology, which I like. And so it was kind of a cool little match made in heaven.
Reverend Tavis, of course, he was entertaining the thought of retiring. He was getting retirement age.
Dave Terbeest, what a gracious man. I give him a lot of credit for agreeing to be a co-pastor at the end of his career with Bob being his co-pastor, a young guy.
Last January, as the search committee became involved in a continued search in the beginning of 1990, we firmly believe that the Lord led us to Pastor Bob Bauer.
I now declare that the pastoral relationship between the Reverend Bob Bauer and the Faith Reformed Church is fully constituted.
Pastor Bob, one of the first things he did when he became senior pastor was he went out and he did a survey, door to door and at the local mall, and he'd ask people, do you go to church? If they said yes, he'd say, thank you very much, have a good day. If they said no, he'd say, have you ever gone to church? And at that point, everyone at some point had a church background or experience. And he said, okay, well, why don't you go now? Church is irrelevant to my life. Church is judgmental, and I don't know what to wear. Top 3 reasons on the board.
And so we took that as kind of marching orders to say, if we truly want to be an outreach-driven church, we have to figure out who are those that are unchurched, that are disconnected from God. What are they like? What do they think? And a lot had to do with changing the style of worship. Everyone at Faith at the time liked the worship. There's nothing wrong with it. But the people outside the church coming in would kind of go, I don't know how to do this. It's different than who we are. So then we created what we called the new experience in worship.
Bob actually asked me one year, he says, I want you to head up the worship team. And I looked at him, I said, are you crazy? Because being the worship team in the past always meant planning the services, and I'm not a singer, I'm not a musician. He goes, no, what I want you to do is just put your own team together, investigate what would it look like to have a service that was designed to reach people that were disconnected from God. So we did. We put a team together. We traveled all over the Midwest. We debated at length what that should look like. And at the end of the day, our conclusion was it needed to be whatever would be relevant to the culture we were in and effective.
So we had a traditional service the way they had done it for many years, and we offered this new experience in worship. And we canvassed the communities, we worked at creating this new experience in worship, and then in '94, in October, we actually launched that service.
And Bob was so nervous. He came here early and prayed the morning of that first service, and I think his prayer was, God, if only one person comes, I'll be happy.
I was really, really anxious. I didn't sleep. Maybe 3, maybe 4 hours, maybe not at all. I don't recall. All I know is I got up at like 3:30 and drove from the north side of South Holland here, parked my car, walked in here, this very auditorium, walked up to the front, got on my knees and said, Lord, I am out of my mind fearful. What if no one shows up? I didn't hear an audible voice, but what I believe the Lord impressed in my heart is, if one person who's far from God shows up, it was worth every flyer, every prayer, all the resources, all the work. And I did get up and go home and shower at about 5. Came back, first service was finished, and I was nervous, like, and then all of a sudden at 11:15, the new service, a guy came in a leather jacket, sat in the back row over there, walked up to him and said to him, I'm Bob. And he said, yeah, it's my first time here. I saw the sign. You guys are no longer Dutch. And I went, what? We had changed the church from Faith Reformed Church to Faith Church, and somehow he equated the Reform from being an ethnic. And I went, in my mind, God, there's the one guy. But it ended up being that like 160 people came to that service, and in some respects, the rest is history. The movement started.
It was exciting at that first worship service to see the number of people who were there. The music was nothing in comparison to what we have now.
Oh gosh, compared to now, it was like ancient. Oh, I just laugh thinking about it. We would just have one guitar player. I think we had one of the high school kids playing drums.
And the first service, the first outreach service, or if you want to call it contemporary, was incredibly Mickey Mouse. It was not high polished.
A lot of people will point to Faith Church like, oh, it was cutting edge on contemporary worship and technology, and back in those days it wasn't necessarily the most awesome thing you'd ever seen. We had overhead projectors, and he'd slap the sheet up and it would be upside down. He'd have to turn it, and sing the words. And but the people that were coming, the people that were gathering there were not your typical church people.
Well, first I remember that all these new people started to come. And having grown up at Faith Church and knowing everybody and everybody knew you, it was a little difficult. To be honest, I kept going to the traditional service. I knew everybody. It's what I was used to, and I could get home in time for ESPN NFL Game Day before the games started. But then I started to hear about the life changes. And so I came to one of the services and I saw a guy named Jeff Henderson playing drums. And he wasn't walking the closest with the Lord when I knew him. And he was playing in a band called Buddha Knievel downtown. And I thought, if this is what it takes to get Jeff back to church, I need to be behind this.
When we see these people from maybe who grew up in the church, but they really weren't on fire for who Jesus was, to becoming on fire, excited about what was going on. And then you also had people come who were not part of the church at all. So you had those, two different kinds of stories taking place. And I remember at times thinking about this place is crazy. So it's like, this is, I've never experienced anything like this before.
A week after week, watching these people just change, watching their life change, and it's extraordinary. Yeah, there were people coming from everywhere. And it was just, I'm thinking, this is what the church is supposed to look like, where everybody's welcome and everybody's coming alive in Christ. And I mean, people you'd see that I'd known my whole life that were changing right before my eyes.
Those services where it would just be like people going up and you'd hear people sharing their stories, just very real and not ashamed to say, this is who I was, but this is who I am now, and this is what God's doing in me. And it would just be so cool, because you'd just be like, I can't believe this. Like, what the Bible talks about, like lives being changed, it really is happening. It's not just something from the book of Acts that used to happen 2,000 years ago, and we can't expect that in church anymore. We should just all sit quietly and, listen and go, come on Sunday, and that's about it. But this was like, no, God is changing people's lives. So it was really cool.
A lot of people didn't like that music necessarily.
We're traditional. We liked the hymns, and the organ was all right. And we said, well, if those people want to do that, that's all right. Bless their heart. And we saw people coming, and we saw the enthusiasm, and yet we were very satisfied and happy, as were most of our friends.
Now, as far as I'm concerned, I would rather have a quartet sing and sing a few hymns in there, but I would say, hey, if that brings people into the church and also bring them to Christ, I'm all for it.
We had the traditional service before, and that began to shrink. The contemporary service continued to grow. Over a period of a couple of years, it became very apparent that we were becoming two churches. There were people that were part of the traditional service that were unhappy because they felt they were neglected.
And we like this, and now these other people have pushed us out of the way a little, maybe. It was like there was almost a sense of competition, and it just became kind of difficult to live with, a house divided, and not totally divided, but a house with some division. It's hard to move it forward.
Everybody likes to be liked. I like to be liked. And there was a season where some people didn't like me, and I really hurt because I led and represented the changes. I was not liked.
I saw Bob take a lot of hits for this vision. I was with him on many occasions when he would talk about things that were happening that were very hard for him and even his family as well. But even though that was going on, I saw deep within his heart this resolve, almost this fierce desire to pursue the will of God no matter what the cost.
I truly respect that part of him because it takes a lot of courage sometimes to go down a path that is, challenging or might be controversial or resisted, and to continue on and knowing, that even if you're the only one, you believe God's telling you to continue on, it's, courageous.
But there were moments. I remember a night where I went in the basement and said, Lord, I want to escape. I want to go take another church that likes me. And then I remember going, Lord, I sure hope I didn't screw this up. I don't want to be a stat. And I didn't hear audible voices, but I did. My soul took comfort in the fact that I went right to the scripture and said, is there anything that I'm doing in this leading of this change that was contrary to scripture? And I could not find an answer. There was nothing that I felt like I was doing outside of scripture. And so it gave me great confidence in the scriptures to say, Lord, you're going to do this. You said, lift up my name, you'll draw people to yourself. Your word says you proclaim the gospel and let him save. He does the work. I knew it wasn't any style or music or a billboard. God may use those things, but the Lord saves. And it took the pressure off me. There were moments where I was really scared, but they got me to Jesus, and he was my confidence.
So we got together and we struggled with what do we do? And the decision was that we would become single focus, that we would not be two churches, that we are sold out to the vision of reaching disconnected and growing the connected. And that means we're going to have one style of worship and not two.
At one meeting, the board, I didn't initiate it. One of our elders said, I make a motion that we become one church. Kind of, this is who we are, take it or leave it, because it was too hard to be polarized between. And I remember saying to the elders and deacons, like, hey guys, you realize if we make this decision, we're going to lose people. And one of the leaders said, if it means we're united in this mission, let's do it. That was a tough decision because we lost people that we loved and they loved us, and they went to churches that were closer to how their heartbeat for worship was.
But I think a good thing that came out of that is that it would definitely resulted in a church that was unified in purpose. And that was something that then we saw momentum kind of begin to take place, where just as the purpose, people just owned it, lived it, and we just went out and we just saw incredible things begin to happen as a result of that.
These stories of life change were just getting out, and people were so excited about what God was doing that they were talking about it in their neighborhoods and at work and at school, and people were just coming, and there was no place to go. We had to move the offices out of the church building in order to have ministry space. Kids ministry was just taken over and booming.
You had kids just barging at the door to get in. I mean, we had so many families coming because the kids had come with another faith church kid and said, hey mom, we got to go back to that church. When you don't have space to put any more small groups for kids and you're putting them in the women's bathroom because that's the only place you have them in South Holland, or you're wheeling down a TV cart down these metal cement stairs to get to the ministry house, it's like you don't do that for any other reason but to reach the heart of a kid.
We'd start a service and I would say, where is everybody? It would be 5-10 minutes later, and then the service would be full of people, and I'm convinced it was because there was a traffic jam in the back there because people just couldn't get in. It was just so many people.
It was chaos on Sunday morning. It was like, okay, God bless, have a great week. Can you leave fast so we can get this ready for the next one and another one? And I remember my head getting done the end of the day, I'd be like, whoa, what just happened,
This place was packed, and it was so obvious that we were landlocked We could not add on to this facility efficiently, so it was just obvious that we needed to find a new home.
I saw the church really wrestle with that decision. Bob and I would talk often on the phone, and being in a place like Paramount, California, that was going through racial change and whatnot, my strong counsel was stay in South Holland, as much as you can. And the team wrestled with that and tried to find the right location.
We tried to find land in South Holland. We went to the mayor and said, "Do you have 20 acres around here?" No. And we said, "We really want to stay here." And then we looked at some acreage in Lansing, and that was too expensive.
And I remember it was a lot of wrestling and prayer, like, where's God going to take us? There was a talk of like Frankfort, like that way in Illinois. And honestly, Dave, my husband, was like, yeah, let's stay in Illinois. I'm praying that we move to Frankfort, because he did not want to move to Indiana at all.
I was probably the only person who was praying against moving to Indiana. I didn't want to move to Indiana. That was the last thing I wanted to do. I was like, there's a ton of land in Illinois. Let's look in Illinois. That's where we need to be. And so I was praying against it, and so that everybody else was praying for the doors to open in Dyer, and I was against it. And God answered my prayer, and he said no to me, and he said yes to Faith Church. That just, again, that was very humbling to me, and was a confirmation that it's way bigger than me and my desires.
All of the leaders, 100% said, we think the Lord is calling us to Dyer, Indiana, as a relocation spot. It was just so miraculous. You have a lot of confidence when that happens.
And our first contact with the developer, who was a great guy, was, no, it's just not available. It's going to be homes, and that's the plan.
He said, no, I'm going to put houses here. Makes sense. You can make a lot more money doing that. And eventually he brought his plan to the town of Dyer, and they said it's way too dense. You need to sell some property to a multi-use facility like a church. And so he came back to us and offered us 5 acres, which is what we had about in South Holland. And we said, we really feel like we're led to need 25 to 40 acres in order to do what the Lord has called us to. So eventually he got to about 20 acres, and there was an adjoining 5-acre parcel that 2 elderly sisters owned, and they weren't willing to sell to him, but they'd sell to us.
I think it was at that point that we saw that God was already moving, and were we willing to step forward with him in relationship to the project.
At the end of the day, we ended up with a project that came in about $9 million, maybe 9.2. God-sized number. At that time, we were about 900 men, women, and children here in South Holland. And for that size of a group to take on a $9.2 million project was ridiculous.
So I called a board meeting like we normally would and said, hey, guys, here's our dilemma. We raised 4.6. We have a 9.2 or $9.6 million building going up. So I said to the group, well, it looks like we're going to have to downsize to a 4.2. Here's the funny thing. One of the leaders of Faith Church said, hey, Bauer, oh, you of little faith, is God in it or not? Maybe we should risk the God-sized dream and go for it, because God's in on this, and this would challenge her. And I changed immediately and went, are you? Yeah, I agree. And we all went, let's go for it.
So I think it would have been easy for us to just be comfortable, maybe not quite be so evangelistic, stop inviting so many people, and just kind of, this is great. Like, let's enjoy what we have. This is perfect. It's a great size. We all know each other. We knew this was our call. And so it may have caused us to be uncomfortable. It may have said we had to change, like, from our little nice, cute, church. It means giving. It means sacrificial giving. It means being obedient to what God's calling us to do and pushing us maybe out of our comfort zone. We had to obey and do what God was calling us to do.
We're standing out here by this field on a beautiful sunny morning. The dream and hope that we have for our church in this spot will take a lot of prayers,
It'll take a supernatural act of God. It'll also take his body, the church. And I want to invite you, and we want to invite you as a leadership of the church to be part of this wonderful dream. It's going to take every single one of you who calls Faith Church your home to be part of this process. We need you. Please join us in the plan of God for Faith's future.
You know, I was a Christian high school teacher. You know, I wasn't making a ton of money, but to be able to contribute to that and be a part of the team was such a blessing for our family.
We took the leap of faith and said, we believe God's going to grow our ministry, and he's going to use this facility that we're going to build to reach a lot of people. So we went for it.
It was thrilling to sit out on those flatbed trucks here in the dirt and see all of the families in their lawn chairs on that groundbreaking day, and just the hope of looking at the neighborhoods and seeing who's God going to bring.
It was the summer of 2003 that we moved to this facility in Dyer, and that was the summer when the attendance just exploded. And I remember we moved into this facility, and it seemed like it was so big at the time, but we had our grand opening and immediately we ran out of room. I mean, we probably had 3 times the amount of people as we normally do, and we just never looked back from then on out.
We hired a consultant, and they came in kind of incognito. It was kind of cool, and they did interviews of everybody, and then they sat us down and said, here's our results. I love this line. He said, Faith Church, you can't build buildings fast enough to get butts in seats. And they said, you got a problem, because you're going to level off, because you're just out of space here in Dyer. They said, you should consider multi-site. And in my mind, I went, multi-who?
Said you're more than 80% full. You should have started thinking about this when you were 60% full. And his direction for us was to look at having other sites. We really had never even thought about that or even had heard about multi-sites.
So, well, I'll give it a try. So I'm like, cool. And then I said to the team there, I said, hey, who wants to go to the one-day conference they have? We found out they had a one-day conference on how to do that.
They said, hey, does anybody on our staff want to go to this conference and learn about multi-site? And nobody wanted to go. Nobody volunteered. And then we heard that it was overnight and it was free. And we love our kids, but it was overnight and it was free. And so we're like, we'll go.
So Dave and I were young parents. We were like a night away to a hotel, we'll go. So we kind of just said, hey, we'll go. So we went to this thing just expecting it was our job to hear all about multi-site, come back and report to the elders and the consistory and say, this is what multi-site is. Maybe this is an option for us. Going into it, we didn't even know, really.
We took a ton of notes. We came back. We said, here's 7 people who could lead this. Here's our report. We think we should totally do this. It makes a lot of sense. Let's go for it.
And I was so blown away by their excitement and joy. And then they said, oh, here's some suggestions of who we think could lead that cause. And I turned to them, I said, you guys should do it.
And at the time we were in children's ministry and we were like, what? Like that was not on our radar screen at all. It was really humbling, and but we prayed about it and wrestled, and we really felt like, yeah, this is what God's calling us to. Like this was his plan all along, even though we had no idea and no concept of that in our future. That's what God's plan was. So we were part of the team that launched the first campus, and it was just a blast.
Cedar Lake and multi-site was, for a lot of people, I think if we were really honest at that time, was the great experiment. We'll see if it works. Good luck with that. If you come back alive, that's awesome. If you just crash and burn, you know what, we tried. And we'll just see what happens. But as time went on and it was growing and healthy and leaders were being developed and people were getting connected and it was impacting a community and people were professing their faith in Christ, it's like, wow, this has got some legs. Pastor Bob really, his heart really started to beat from multiplication and reproduction. And it really got into our DNA, and it was like, not, well, we'll see how it goes. It was like, who can we raise up and who can we send and where should we go next? It started this kind of snowball to 2020, this vision, this goal that's a God-sized goal.
To this day, I do dream about the reproduction of the gospel in sites and people and ministry to different parts of the world.
And that's the journey we've been in, and that's the exciting part, I think, that the impact of this church is not just one location, it's multiple communities, it's multiple regions, and we're just getting started.
Words of advice. What would you say?
Keep the eyes on the Lord.
Yeah, that's good.
For sure. Keep the eyes upon Him. And I think He will direct us. There's no question about it.
You know, I think the worst thing that could happen to Faith Church is that you get somewhere, you get in the back of your mind that, hey, look what we've done.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
Look what we've done. Man, we've got a big church here. We started as a little church in a school 50 years ago. And look at where we come from. It's amazing. No, it's not amazing. God did it, you see.
And we have to remember, it's all about Him.
Yep.
It's not about us. It's all about Him.